Hi, Angela Egan here with Accelerated Learning. Today I want to talk to you about how to analyze a diagnostic assessment. So we are going to take a look at a Core Phonics survey that I administer on a 5th grade student, and I'm going to show you how to look at each section and how to identify a targeted instructional focus for that student. Here's the core phonics that I administered. As you can see, I started with part A. Even though this student is a 5th grader, I want to make sure that I am assessing all areas to make sure that I'm closing all of her academic gaps. As you can see, she has mastered her letter names for uppercase and lowercase letters. For her consonant sounds, she does have some confusion with B and D, so I want to make sure I make note of that because that's going to be really important to practice on a regular basis to help her remember the difference between those two letters and sounds. As we move on to our next section for our vowel sounds, she's able to identify the short and long vowel sounds. And then the reading and decoding is what's really going to help us figure out how to identify that instructional focus. The only section that she did master was part E, which was short vowels and CVC words. So I know that she's fluent at the CVC level. As I mentioned before, she did have some confusion with the B and D. However, for the word in this section, she did use a strategy. She uses her two thumbs up to help differentiate between the two different letters, and then she was able to self-correct. For consonant blends with short vowels, she did score within the strategic range. As you can see, she does have some confusion with vowel consonant E and CVC patterns. For plan and dran, she both read those as long vowel sounds. When she read the word, this word right here, she had read quad instead of qued. So as she was looking at this word, she could have been thinking about a word that made sense, and that could be why she had said quad, or she could have been confusing that short E sound. And then for the word silk, when she read this word, she omitted the L sound. Part G, she also scored within that strategic range for short vowels, digraphs, and the ch trigraph. For this one here, she was unsure of the trigraph DGE, which says J. She had read chid for child, so once again, she wasn't paying attention to the code and she was reading it as a real word. And then for the word fid, she was unsure of that PH pattern. She was trying to think through it, but she was confused by it. And then part H, she scored within the strategic range once again for our controlled vowels. For dirt and bird, she was unsure of the IR sound. And then for NERM, she also did not read the ER as But if you notice here, there are some other words where she was able to get those patterns. So just really important to make note of that so that we incorporate those patterns within her review. And then we get into the long vowel spellings, and she fell within the intensive range, not only for long vowel spellings, but for variant vowels. So I know right away this is going to be her starting point. Her instructional focus is going to be long vowel spellings because she did fall within that intensive range, and there's a lot of patterns that she has not been exposed to yet, or she is just has not mastered those skills. We want to make sure we close those gaps with those patterns. As you can see, she, the EY, the OA, the EA, the AI, the OA, she was really confused by all those. And then once we get down here to the hawks and the haunts, she was really unsure of those vowel sounds altogether, and didn't even try reading the word, kind of gave up as she was reading them because she was so confused. And then I didn't move on to the next low frequency vowel and consonant spellings because she did fall within that intensive range within these two groups. So I want to make sure I start there first. I'm going to talk to you about the different instructional focus areas for a second. If your student knows less than 15 letter names or letter sounds on your diagnostic assessment, you ultimately want to start with the day 1 of the first letter. If your student knows more than 15 letter names and letter sounds but less than 20, then you would really want to start on day 2 of the first letter, and then just do day 2 and day 3 for each letter. If your student knows more than 20 letter names and letter sounds but cannot blend or read words, then you really want to start with day 3 of the letter naming unit and only focus on day 3 for each letter. And if they know all of their letter names and sounds and can blend and read at least one CVC word, they're definitely ready for the phonological awareness and that CVC unit. As you're looking at this assessment, if they fall within the strategic range for CVC words, you may be able to just incorporate the patterns or the sounds that they're confusing into their daily review, and they can begin the beyond CVC range. If they're in the intensive range, you want to make this your starting point. And if they're benchmarked, then you know they're successful with this skill level. For beyond CVC, that's where it's a little bit more complex because you're incorporating your blends with short vowels. Digraphs and trigraphs would also be part of that beyond CVC range, as well as our controlled vowels. So these 3 are really in the same unit. So in order for students to be, benchmark within this unit, they will have to have at least a 14 out of 15 for all 3 levels. Depending on your student's grade level, if they fall within the strategic range for consonant blends at short vowels or Part G or Part H, this could possibly be part of their daily review. I would say if they're in 4th or 5th grade, then you can incorporate some of those skills within their daily review and then begin with the long vowel patterns. If they are in 1st, 2nd, or 3rd grade and they score within the strategic range, I would, and they were benchmark on in the CVC range, I would make this their starting point. And then if your students are, either benchmark or strategic, depending on the grade level, then you could possibly start them at the long vowel range for their instructional focus. If they're in, like I said, 4th or 5th grade and they were strategic or benchmark for the previous skills, then this could be their starting point. If they are in grades 1, 2, or 3 and they fall within a strategic range in this level, then you would want to make this their starting point. So you really have to take in a couple of different factors when you're identifying that instructional focus. It's not always going to be clear cut. You have to think about your student, you have to think about the skills they've been explicitly taught, and you have to think about, use other data points sometimes to help you get a clear picture and help you really target that instruction. Variant vowels go along with long vowel spellings. They're more complex patterns. And then low frequency vowel and consonant spellings, once again, some of those patterns go along with long spellings. Some of them are introduced in multisyllabic. I didn't get to the multisyllabic portion with this student. However, there is the multisyllabic sections, and that's where you're really going to, if you think about that, that's really where you want your 4th and your 5th graders to be. However, if you have students who've mastered all of these skills and you're like, oh, they've mastered the code, they're actually not done yet, because that's where you really want to get into your Greek and your Latin root words. And my advanced phonics unit covers all of that. And there's tons of materials and resources provided that can support you to make sure that you're supporting your highest learners. If you need help identifying an instructional focus, feel free to always reach out to me. I'd be more than happy to look at an assessment or help you figure out your student's instructional focus. Ultimately, you're going to have phonological awareness and letter naming, letter sound. You're going to have phonological awareness and CVC patterns, phonological awareness and beyond CVC patterns, phonological awareness and long vowel patterns, multisyllabic word reading, and advanced phonics, which is really that those root word origins. Now I'm going to show you a little chart that I made that helps me organize this data. Here is the data analysis chart. Every 2 weeks at my school, we analyze student data. We're usually analyzing DIBELS data, but then we also take a look at any other assessments that have been administered to make sure we get a clear picture of that student. So as you notice, when you look at this chart, you're going to notice some of the information that we saw in the core phonics. So I know this student has to review the j and the f patterns, as well as the b and the d sounds The student has confusion with short E, so I want to make sure I add that information. The student has difficulty reading words with final blends. There's definitely some confusion with those vowel consonant E and CVC patterns, so we want to make sure that we get a lot of practice with those patterns. Some are controlled vowel review, and then the student has not mastered the vowel teams, which we are aware of because I have not explicitly taught that to that student during small group instruction. As I mentioned to you previously, the starting point for the student is going to be long vowel patterns. And we are actually going to follow this progression that I'm going to show you. We are going to start with vowel consonant E patterns. And then we are going to continue through this scope and sequence. And within our instruction, I'm going to make sure that I have plenty of opportunities to review and practice those previously learned skills or those patterns that the student still has not fully mastered just yet. Typically, we spend 1 to 2 days on each pattern. The goal is that through daily repetition, daily review, and practice, you don't want to hold your students at a skill level for too long because we want to make sure that we're paying close attention to our pacing so that we are moving our students and truly closing gaps. Since the student is a 5th grader, I don't have any time to waste because the student is going to middle school next year. So I really want to make sure I am sending her off with the foundational skills that she needs to be successful. So as I mentioned, we're going to start off with the vowel consonant E pattern, and then I'm going to follow this progression for every single lesson. I'm going to have sound fluency, sound dictation, and they are going to, this part of the lesson is going to include the patterns that she confused on that diagnostic assessment, or if you recently administered a Dibbles assessment, you want to make sure you're including any patterns, any sounds, and really looking for those trends to see which sounds and patterns you need to review during the review portion of your lesson. This section is really, really important because this is going to help your students really master those previously learned skills. And you really want to make sure you're not skipping out on the review portion of the lessons. And then you have your phonological awareness activity, which we're going to talk about. I'll be sending you a video to help you identify that specific instructional focus. The goal is for our students to be able to segment at the phoneme level. And then we have some of those advanced phonemic awareness skills that your students will be working on ultimately once they reach that beyond and long vowel level. You're going to introduce your new skill, your new pattern. So if I'm working with vowel consonant E, I'm starting off with that A consonant E pattern. So that's what I'm going to explicitly talk to my students about during this section of the lesson. I'm going to pay attention to those articulatory gestures, help them form the sound in their mouth, and make sure I'm really explicit with that new pattern. They're going to get guided practice, and they're going to learn how to decode words with that vowel pattern. Throughout my lessons, you'll see there's a vowel blending routine that helps them to really focus on those vowel sounds. And then you have word fluency with the new pattern, word dictation. You're going to pre-teach any high frequency words that are in the decodable passage. And then you're going to pre-teach any vocabulary that you need to pre-teach before the content passage. And then they have sentence dictation. Now, if you are feeling super overwhelmed, your first goal is to analyze your data and fill out. I will share this chart with you. You can fill out this chart or you can fill out a chart of your own, but you want to make sure you can really see the trends and see the areas where your students need the most support. And then you want to make sure you identify that instructional focus. If you're feeling like you're ready to just take off, I'm going to be sharing some free resources with you next that you can get started on, but I will be sending some follow-up videos that are going to go through each of these structures and routines so that you feel confident delivering this instruction by the end of all of the videos. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out. I'm going to show you some of those free resources now. Now that you have your starting point, we have to begin the instruction. And so underneath free resources, you're going to notice that there are general lesson plans that you can follow for each skill group. And so this group is phonological awareness and long vowel word reading. So each of the groups are going to start off with a general lesson plan that's going to walk you through all of the steps and give you specific wording, specific activities to help you through the lessons. And then as you scroll down, you're going to notice that there's going to be the progression of the different skills, where you can take notes and log when those skills have been completed. And then you're going to get into your resources. And so, as you notice here, you're going to start with this specific student. I started right with A consonant E, long vowel, week 1. And then we progressed through the scope and sequence. And after that student completed her intervention cycle, she actually mastered all of the skills and goals that we had created at the beginning of the lesson, where we used that core phonics originally to diagnose and identify her instructional focus. The goal is to be consistent with your structures and your routines. Students need repetition and daily practice with patterns that they are still confusing. And you want to make sure that as you're moving through your lessons, you're really paying attention to your pacing, because you should be able to get through all of these activities within in one day, depending on how much time you have, but 1 to 2 days should be enough time with each pattern. So you have your sound fluency, you have your sound dictation, which are going to take those patterns from the skills that the student scored within that strategic range for, and you're going to make sure they're practicing them. There are some of the outcome boxes to help your students for the review portion, where you review patterns like are controlled, and then you have your explicit teaching of the new pattern, so you know what pattern you're teaching based off of the top of the worksheet. It will tell you the pattern. You're explicitly teaching that to them, showing them how to decode that pattern. They're going to get word reading with that pattern, word writing. Then you're going to be practicing those heart words. And so for the heart words for this lesson, you're going to notice as you scroll down, there are some review heart words. These are based on the other skill groups within the program. And then you'll notice the heart word fluency has the new heart words. So 8, late, they're going to follow the pattern that you're explicitly teaching. State, made, name, gave. These are temporarily irregular heart words, because now that we've taught them the vowel consonant pattern, these aren't so tricky. So when you're doing your heart word writing, you can pull them from the fluency phrases, because the fluency phrases are going to be incorporating those the words that are aligned to the patterns. There's going to be some lessons where they're not aligned to the patterns. They're just they don't always match up perfectly, but throughout the whole program, the goal is to align the heart words with the patterns that are being explicitly taught. And these are previous heart words that were learned in the program. And then you have your decodable text at the bottom, which is going to include the pattern that you're explicitly teaching. You're going to provide them with a sentence to write. And then you're going to get a content passage, because once they get through most of the Beyond level, they're introduced to content passages. The goal is that your students are able to identify the target pattern when they're reading decodable passages. They're becoming more fluent at the sentence level. However, we need to make sure that we're exposing them to text that's not as controlled. And we want to make sure that they're recognizing those patterns within that text. And that's how you improve their fluency, and you make sure that not only is their word reading improving, but the oral reading fluency is also improving. And then they have, they can track how many words they read in a minute, and they can do some basic comprehension practice with, who is the passage about, what, where, when, why, and they start to work on those comprehension skills. So as you can see, if you are following a specific structure, if you are consistent on a regular basis, you can really touch upon all of the effective components of literacy instruction. And so now what I would like you to do, as you are analyzing your data and coming up with your instructional focus, I would like you to begin your lessons. And then I am going to send you additional videos to show you how to walk through each step. So your goal right now is just to analyze your data. I'll be sharing this chart with you so that you can, analyze the patterns and look over the different trends as you're analyzing the student's assessment. And so you all have all of that information in one place. So I will share the document with you too, so you can input that data. And as I mentioned, you have access to these free resources once you identify that instructional focus. And if you have any other questions, please feel free to reach out to me. Thank you.